A forgotten place, extreme cold, one decision that changed everything. Watch closely, like the video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. North Creek, Alaska, was the kind of place that disappeared quietly, not with sirens or headlines, but with boarded windows, rusting mailboxes, and the slow fading of porch lights that were never turned back on. The settlement lay pressed against a line of dark hills where spruce trees crowded together like spectators, watching something slowly fail. In winter, the sun skimmed the horizon for a few weak hours, and the rest of the day belonged to shadow, wind, and cold that crept into bone and thought alike. There had once been over 200 people here. By the time this winter began, fewer than 30 remained. Evelyn Harper was one of them. She had lived in North Creek for nearly 15 years, long enough to remember when the small gravel airstrip still received weekly supply flights, and when the school building echoed with children's voices instead of wind rattling loose siding. She had come north in her late 20s, trained as an emergency medical responder, chasing a sense of usefulness she had never quite found in cities. Up here, usefulness was never abstract. Someone was always hurt, stranded, or one bad decision away from freezing to death. But usefulness alone could not keep a town alive. The school closed first. Then the clinic reduced its hours until it closed entirely. The airstrip followed, deemed too expensive to maintain for so few residents. When the state rerouted the supply road after a landslide, North Creek slipped off the map in all but name. People left in waves, selling houses for whatever they could get, abandoning others entirely. Some promised they would come back in spring. Most never did. Evelyn stayed. She lived alone in a small wood frame house near the edge of town, its paint long stripped away by wind and ice. Her days followed a careful routine shaped by necessity. She split wood, checked her fuel levels, inventoried food, and listened to the weather radio with the attention others gave to prayer. She helped her remaining neighbors when they needed stitches, advice, or simply reassurance. In a place like North Creek, everyone carried multiple roles, and hers never truly ended. Winter arrived early that year. By late October, snow already lay in hard, uneven drifts along the road. November brought darkness that felt heavier than usual, pressing down on the town like a held breath. Fuel deliveries were delayed twice. A barge that was supposed to come upriver never arrived at all. Rumors spread that supplies would be rationed come December. Evelyn felt the quiet anxiety settle in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. Behind her house, the hillside rose sharply, its surface broken by stone and frozen earth. Half hidden by brush and snow was a narrow opening most people avoided. It was an old service tunnel, cut straight into the rock decades earlier during a brief period of geological surveying. The project had failed, the crews had left, and the tunnel had been forgotten. Children once dared each other to step inside. Adults called it unsafe and told stories about collapses that had never actually happened. Evelyn had passed it hundreds of times. She noticed it properly one evening in early November, when the temperature dropped suddenly and stayed there. That night, the cold reached levels that usually forced her to run her stove harder than she liked. Yet when she stepped outside to check her generator, she felt a faint breath of warmer air drifting from the hillside behind her. It made no sense. The next morning, she walked up to the tunnel entrance, her boots crunching on frozen snow. The opening was narrow but stable, framed by old timbers darkened with age. She stood there for a long moment, listening. There was no dripping water, no shifting stone, just stillness. She stepped inside. The darkness swallowed her quickly, but what struck her was not fear, it was the air. It was cool, but not biting. It carried the clean, dry smell of stone, not rot or dampness. She took a few more steps, then stopped and exhaled slowly. Her breath did not fog. Evelyn stayed only a minute that first time. She returned home unsettled, her mind turning over possibilities she did not yet want to name. That evening, she checked her thermometer out of habit, then went back outside with it in her pocket. Inside the tunnel, the reading barely moved. Over the next few days, she returned again and again, morning, night, during snowfall, after clear skies. Each time, the result was the same. While the outside temperature plunged and climbed in violent swings, the tunnel remained steady, calm, unchanging. She began to think about the coming months. North Creek depended on fragile systems, fuel that could freeze, food that could spoil or be ruined by cold, medications that lost effectiveness if mishandled. In past winters, people had managed through luck as much as planning. This year felt different. The town was smaller, older, more vulnerable. Evelyn stood at the tunnel entrance one evening as the sky darkened, watching the wind drag snow across the ground like smoke. She placed a gloved hand against the stone wall just inside and felt its quiet, stored warmth. The town was disappearing above ground, but beneath her hand, the mountain did not care about abandonment, budgets, or roads that no longer led anywhere. It simply held its temperature, steady and patient, waiting to be noticed. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt something other than worry. She felt possibility. The tunnel had never been meant for living people. That much was obvious the moment Evelyn stepped farther inside with a proper lamp and a coil of rope slung over her shoulder. The passage was narrow and straight, carved with utilitarian precision rather than comfort. The stone walls, scarred by old drill marks and shallow fractures where tools had slipped decades ago. This had been a working space, temporary by design, created to answer a question and abandoned when the answer proved unprofitable. Local records, sparse as they were, said the tunnel dated back to the early 1930s. A short-lived survey crew had driven it into the hillside, searching for mineral veins that never materialized. They left behind timbers, rusted brackets, and a reputation for danger that grew larger with each retelling. No one ever documented a collapse. No one ever bothered to correct the rumors either. Evelyn moved slowly, testing each step before trusting it. Years in rescue work had trained her to respect confined spaces, to read the air, to listen for sounds that didn't belong. The tunnel floor was uneven but dry, packed dirt mixed with stone chips that had long ago settled into place. The walls felt solid beneath her palm, cool but not cold, the temperature unchanged from the entrance inward. She stopped every few yards to check the air with a small handheld sensor she still owned from her medic days. Oxygen levels were normal, no trace of gas, no warning signs. The tunnel extended farther than she had expected, nearly 60 feet before widening slightly into a rough alcove where equipment had once been staged. Standing there, lamp raised, Evelyn felt the weight of the mountain above her and the strange calm that came with it. She began returning daily. At first it was curiosity, then it became intention. She brought a broom and cleared decades of fallen grit from the alcove floor. She removed rotted boards and stacked the sound ones aside. She marked weak spots in the timber supports and reinforced them with lumber salvaged from an abandoned shed near the old schoolhouse. Each trip inside lasted a little longer than the last. The temperature never changed. It was cool enough to feel refreshing after the brutal cold outside, but not so cold that her fingers stiffened. The air remained dry, carrying none of the musty dampness she had expected. Slowly, the idea she had tried to keep distant took shape in her mind. She started small. One evening, she carried a sealed crate of medical supplies into the tunnel and set it against the stone wall. Insulin, antibiotics, emergency kits she could not afford to lose to freezing temperatures. She checked them daily, monitoring consistency, effectiveness, smell. Nothing changed. The supplies stayed exactly as they were meant to be. Next came food. Canned goods first, then dried goods sealed in metal containers. She built simple wooden shelves using scrap lumber, spacing them carefully to allow air to circulate. She positioned everything deliberately, thinking like a medic and a logistics worker rather than a homeowner. This was not comfort. This was function. A week passed, then another. Winter tightened its grip on North Creek, temperatures sinking lower each night. Outside, fuel lines froze. Inside the tunnel, the thermometer needle remained steady, indifferent to the chaos above. Evelyn recorded the readings in a small notebook, the habit of documentation hard to break. Every entry was nearly identical. She did not tell anyone at first. In a town like North Creek, ideas spread quickly, and not always kindly. She needed proof before she invited scrutiny. That proof arrived unexpectedly one afternoon when she returned from checking on an elderly neighbor and found a truck parked crookedly near her house. Tom Alvarez stood beside it, stamping his feet against the cold. He had worked maintenance for the town before there was no longer a town to maintain. His face was tight with worry. "My freezer failed," he said without preamble. "Power flickered last night. Everything thawed, then refroze. Meat's ruined. And my wife's meds." He trailed off. Evelyn hesitated only a moment. "Come with me," she said. She led him up the hill into the tunnel, watched his posture shift as soon as he stepped inside, shoulders relaxing despite himself. She showed him the shelves, the thermometer, the neat arrangement of supplies. She explained nothing at first. She didn't need to. Tom exhaled slowly. "It's stable," he said. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "It is." By the next day, Tom returned with a small crate of medication and a promise to help reinforce the entrance if needed. Word traveled quietly after that. A neighbor asked to store vaccines. Another requested space for preserved fish. Evelyn agreed, one request at a time, careful not to overextend what she had not yet tested at scale. She laid down simple rules. Everything labeled, everything logged. Nothing moved without her knowing. It wasn't control for its own sake. It was safety. By mid-December, the tunnel no longer felt abandoned. It felt purposeful. Evelyn stood inside the alcove one evening, listening to the wind scream across the hillside outside. The shelves were filling. The air remained unchanged. For the first time since the town had begun to shrink, something here was growing instead of disappearing. But winter was only beginning, and the forecast promised far worse than anything North Creek had faced in years. She closed her notebook, shut off her lamp, and stepped back toward the entrance, unaware that the quiet solution she had uncovered was about to become the town's only line of defense. Winter arrived all at once, without transition or warning. One night the wind rose sharply, dragging snow across the frozen ground in long white streaks. And by morning, North Creek was sealed off from the rest of the world. The road vanished first, swallowed beneath drifts that hardened like stone within hours. The weather radio crackled with half-finished warnings before falling silent altogether. Temperatures dropped fast, -20, then lower. Generators that had limped through previous winters began to fail under the strain. Fuel thickened. Batteries drained faster than anyone expected. Inside homes, the air grew sharp and metallic with cold. Food froze solid in pantries meant to keep it merely cool. Canned goods burst. Glass jars cracked. Medications lost potency overnight. Evelyn felt the shift before anyone said a word. She heard it in the knock on her door late one evening, urgent and unpolished. She opened it to find two neighbors standing in the dark, bundled in mismatched layers, breath rising in pale clouds. They did not waste time with explanations. "We heard about the tunnel," one of them said. "Is it true?" Evelyn stepped aside and let them in. By the end of the next day, people were coming steadily. Not in panic, not yet, but with the tight, controlled urgency of those who knew they were running out of options. They carried crates, boxes, cloth-wrapped bundles, frozen vegetables, meat they could no longer keep at home, insulin packed in snow, and hope. Each person asked the same question in a different way. "Will this work?" Evelyn answered honestly. She showed them the thermometer, the shelves, the records. She explained what she knew and admitted what she didn't. She never promised safety. She promised consistency. That was enough. The tunnel changed character quickly. What had been a personal experiment became shared infrastructure almost overnight. Evelyn reorganized the space with ruthless efficiency, expanding shelving, designating zones, labeling everything in clear block letters. She recorded names, quantities, dates. No item went unlogged. No exception was made, even when faces grew tense. The cold outside deepened. By Christmas, North Creek was fully isolated. Snowdrifts rose past window height. The wind never stopped howling, turning the town into a place of soundless movement and sudden danger. People stayed indoors as much as possible, rationing fuel, checking on one another when they could. The tunnel became the only place where the cold did not dictate every decision. Evelyn moved through her days with practiced calm. She checked the shelves morning and night. She monitored airflow, reinforced a sagging support beam, cleared snow from the entrance after every storm. She slept lightly, listening for changes, ready to respond if something went wrong. Then the forecast changed. When the radio crackled back to life for a brief moment, it carried a single message before cutting out again. A massive storm system was moving in from the north. Prolonged, unstable, the kind that settled in and refused to leave. Evelyn stood in the tunnel entrance afterward, lamp held low, watching the sky darken even further. She felt the weight of what was coming settle in her chest. This would not be a matter of days. It would be weeks. That night, she gathered the remaining residents in the tunnel alcove. There were 15 of them, bundled and quiet, faces drawn tight by cold and uncertainty. The lamplight cast long shadows against the stone walls, making the space feel smaller than it was. "This will get worse," Evelyn said. "We need structure now, not later." She laid out the rules clearly: access times, withdrawal limits, responsibilities. Everyone would help maintain the tunnel. Everyone would contribute what they could. No one would take more than they needed. Disputes would be handled immediately, not allowed to fester. There were no arguments. Fear has a way of sharpening cooperation. The storm arrived 2 days later. Snow fell without pause, driven sideways by wind that seemed to roar with intent. Visibility dropped to nothing. The world beyond the tunnel entrance ceased to exist. Inside homes, people burned fuel at alarming rates just to keep pipes from freezing. Food disappeared faster than planned. What little stability they had relied on collapsed under the duration of the siege. But inside the mountain, nothing changed. The air remained steady. The shelves stood firm. Apples stayed crisp. Meat aged slowly instead of spoiling. Medications remained usable. Each time someone entered the tunnel, they reacted the same way, with disbelief that edged into relief. Evelyn became something she had never set out to be: a coordinator, a decision-maker, a quiet authority people deferred to because the system worked and because she never raised her voice. She tracked every withdrawal, adjusted rations as needed, and made hard calls when supplies ran thin. The storm raged on. By the 7th day, tempers outside the tunnel frayed. Inside, they held. By the 10th, exhaustion set in across the town, but the food remained. On the 12th day, the storm finally began to break, leaving behind a world buried and damaged, but intact enough to endure. When the wind died and the snow stopped falling, North Creek emerged slowly, cautiously, like something waking from hibernation. People stepped outside to assess losses, count fuel, check roofs and fences. The damage was real, but so was the truth none of them could ignore. They had survived, and they had survived because of what lay beneath the mountain. As communication sputtered back to life, word traveled outward. Not as a story of disaster, but as a question. How had a place as small and forgotten as North Creek made it through untouched by starvation or loss? The answer pointed back to the tunnel, and soon it would reach ears far beyond the town's snow-buried streets. The storm did not end cleanly. It weakened in stages, retreating in long, reluctant breaths that left the town suspended between crisis and relief. Snow still fell, lighter now but relentless, and the cold settled deeper, sharper than before. By the second week, North Creek felt less like a place and more like a test that refused to conclude. Temperatures dropped further, reaching levels most of the remaining residents had never experienced. -40. Cold so severe it erased sound, turning footsteps into dull thuds and snapping wood like dry bone. Metal burned to the touch. Breath crystallized instantly, hanging in the air before shattering into frost. Above ground, systems failed one by one. Stoves clogged, chimneys iced over, fuel lines cracked despite insulation. Several homes went dark entirely, their generators silent and useless. People moved between houses only when absolutely necessary, faces wrapped, eyes narrowed against the pain of exposure. Every trip outside carried risk. Inside the tunnel, life continued with unnatural normality. The temperature remained unchanged. The air did not dry further or grow damp. The shelves did not warp. The food did not fail. Each time Evelyn checked the thermometer, it read the same number it had for weeks. The mountain absorbed the chaos without comment, but stability bred pressure of a different kind. As supplies dwindled elsewhere, the tunnel became the center of gravity for the town. People came more often now, sometimes twice a day, their requests urgent but controlled. Evelyn adjusted the system in response, tightening access windows, reassigning responsibilities, pairing stronger residents with weaker ones to ensure no one made the climb alone. Disagreements surfaced, small at first, then sharper. Who needed more calories? Who had already taken too much? Who deserved priority when the shelves began to thin? Evelyn addressed each conflict immediately, refusing to let resentment take root. "This works because it's fair," she said more than once. "The moment it isn't, we lose everything." Her authority was not declared, it was accepted. The tunnel itself demanded attention. Heavy snowfall pressed against the entrance, threatening to seal it completely. Evelyn organized teams to keep a narrow access path open, rotating shifts to prevent exhaustion. She inspected supports daily, reinforcing where the stone showed signs of stress. The work was slow, fingers numb even inside thick gloves, but no one complained. Fear had given way to focus. On the 9th day of the storm, a roof collapsed on the east end of town. No one was inside at the time, but the sound carried through the frozen air like a warning. It reminded everyone how fragile their survival remained. That night, more people asked if they could shelter in the tunnel itself. Evelyn considered carefully. The space was not designed for long-term habitation. Not yet. Airflow would become an issue. So would sanitation. She allowed short stays only, rotating those whose homes were most compromised. It was a compromise, and it held. When the storm finally loosened its grip, it did so without apology. The wind faded. The sky cleared to a hard, bright blue that reflected off endless fields of white. The silence afterward was almost unsettling. Damage assessments began immediately. Fences were gone, storage sheds crashed. A fuel cache ruptured and spilled uselessly into the snow. The town bore scars that would take months to address. Yet as people compared losses, one thing stood out with quiet force. No one had gone hungry. No one had lost critical medication. No one had died. As communication lines were partially restored, state emergency services took notice. North Creek appeared on their reports not as a disaster zone, but as an anomaly. Calls came in asking questions Evelyn had never expected to answer. How had supplies been preserved? Where had people stored food? Who had coordinated distribution? A small team arrived days later, traveling the last miles by snowmobile. They were cautious, professional, skeptical. Evelyn led them into the tunnel, showing them the shelves, the logs, the airflow solutions she had improvised. She answered every question plainly, never embellishing, never claiming more than was true. The officials exchanged looks as they worked through the implications. "This shouldn't have worked," one of them said quietly. "But it did," Evelyn replied. Word spread faster after that, not as rumor, but as fact. North Creek had survived the worst winter in decades because of something old and overlooked beneath a mountain. Discussions began about formalizing the space, reinforcing it properly, expanding capacity. For the first time in years, the town's future entered conversation without irony. Evelyn stood at the tunnel entrance one evening as the sun dipped low, painting the snow in cold gold. She felt exhaustion settle deep into her muscles, but beneath it was something steadier. Purpose. The test had not broken them. It had revealed what they could become. And as the wind finally stilled, and the mountain held its quiet watch, it was clear that North Creek would not disappear after all. Spring did not arrive in North Creek the way it did in other places. It came cautiously, as if unsure whether it was welcome. Snow softened, then hardened again. Days lengthened by minutes at a time. The silence that followed the storm lingered, heavy but no longer threatening. When the road crews finally reached the outskirts of town weeks later, they found a community tired, damaged, and very much alive. The officials returned soon after, this time not in emergency mode,
but with clipboards, questions, and proposals. They walked the tunnel carefully, measuring, photographing, testing airflow and structural integrity. They spoke in terms Evelyn had not heard used about North Creek in years: infrastructure, resilience, long-term viability. The conclusion was unavoidable. What had begun as a personal solution had become a public asset. At a town meeting held in the partially repaired community hall, the remaining residents gathered for the first time since before the storm.
Faces looked older, but steadier. When the discussion turned to the tunnel, there was no debate about its value. The question was only how to move forward without losing what had made it work. The proposal was simple. The tunnel would be designated as a permanent communal facility, reinforced and expanded with state assistance. Evelyn would oversee operations, not as an owner, but as a steward. In exchange, the town would commit to maintaining the space collectively, ensuring it remained available in future winters. Evelyn listened without speaking until the end. "I'll stay," she said finally. "But only if this remains about cooperation, not control. It worked because people trusted it, because we trusted each other." No one disagreed. Work began as soon as the ground softened enough to allow it. The tunnel was extended deeper into the hillside, carefully shored and reinforced. New chambers were carved for long-term storage. Ventilation shafts were installed properly this time, designed to maintain airflow without disturbing the stable temperature that had saved them all. Solar-powered lighting replaced oil lamps, and the secondary entrance was added for safety. Evelyn worked alongside the crews, learning where theory met reality. She documented everything: temperatures, load limits, best practices. The tunnel was no longer improvised. It was intentional. As summer approached, something unexpected happened. People returned. A family that had left 3 years earlier came back to reclaim their house. A former resident asked about reopening a small supply shop. Word had spread, not just of survival, but of stability. North Creek was no longer a place waiting to vanish. It was a place that had adapted. Evelyn declined offers to relocate. She turned down a consulting role in Anchorage. When asked why, she gestured toward the hillside behind her house. "This is home," she said, "and it still has work to do." By autumn, the tunnel was fully operational as a permanent facility. Supplies were stocked deliberately. Records were maintained with care. The system that had emerged under pressure was now refined, ready not just to endure, but to support. When winter returned, it did so with familiar force. Snow fell early. The cold settled deep. But this time, there was no panic. The tunnel functioned quietly, steadily, just as it had before. Food remained fresh. Medicine remained viable. Life continued. One evening, as snow drifted softly across the valley, Evelyn stood at the entrance, watching the light fade. The town behind her glowed faintly, windows lit, smoke rising from chimneys repaired and reinforced. Beneath her feet, the mountain held its constant, patient temperature. She thought about how close North Creek had come to disappearing, how easily it could have been written off as another forgotten dot on a map. Instead, it had found a future not by building higher or faster, but by looking inward, by using what was already there. The tunnel did not promise comfort. It promised reliability. And in a place like this, that was everything. Evelyn turned back toward the light, toward the quiet order of shelves and stone and shared responsibility. The mountain remained steady behind her, unchanged by seasons or storms. North Creek would remain, not because it resisted the cold, but because it learned how to live with it. Some stories end quietly, but stay with you. If this one did, like the video, subscribe, and share where you're watching from.